Hi, how you doing?
Bonjour.
It's
Bonjour,
great.
monsieur.
He's down here this time. He's down here this time. Welcome back, Sean.
Thank you very much. Nice to be back.
Yes, oh, it is. It's lovely to have you return, and so quickly as well. We've only had a few since your last visit. And
yes. Hello, Ash.
Hello, Sean. Yes. Oh, I like this. Yes. Right.
Yes. Yeah. This is good. So anyway, he's not here flogging stuff this time. We're not trying to flog cheese or anything like that. So going straight into it, this is
purely links if you,
purely the whole thing, but we will put links on. It doesn't matter. We might. We'll see. Anyway, okay. So look, I'm going to go straight into this, and I'm going to say, because normally I ask Ash this, but Sean, what have we been reading this week?
Well, a fascinating book. Now, I was in touch with a friend of mine who's she's she teaches literature at one of the universities, and she said, you must look at M.R. James. So M.R. James is where I went, and I found a book called Casting Runes. And then, of course, went to Google, and he said, oh, fascinating story. So there I thought, well, I think maybe we should follow this path. So we have Casting the Runes, M.R. James, and it was written first published in 1911. So, right. So we're at the beginning of the 19th century. So we've got to put ourselves in that position. And of course, this is way before TV and way before any of the modern technology that we have nowadays. It was a book, and I guess there was a lot of reading going on. I guess you were either a reader or you weren't a reader.
Well, I think people used to read, didn't they? They actually used to sit around, and one person used to read to everyone else in the house. That used to be a regular thing.
Yeah. So here ensues a story that can have you on the edge of your seat, and it had me on the edge of my seat. I don't know about you two.
Well, it's one of my all-time favourite stories, but we need the synopsis. Tell us what it's about. Tell us the idea. Tell us the story.
Okay, so the story is about it's about somebody that is living at a place called Lufford Abbey. His name is Carswell, and he's put in some papers to be read because he wants to be considered. He wants his paper to be considered for a reading. So Mr. Edward Dunning reads the story, or reads the paper, and decides that it's a load of rubbish, and it's recorded as being such. It turns out that Mr. Carswell was in a similar position earlier in his life, and there was a man called Harrington who did exactly the same, and he was presented with a paper by Carswell, and it was thrown out. It was thrown out because there was lots of talk of alchemy. So alchemy ensues through the rest of the story. It turns out that Harrington, earlier in the life, had thrown out this paper on April the 15th. Actually, April the 20th was when it was thrown out, and 3 months later, his life was taken, very mysteriously. So now coming up to, let's say, the present day, where Dunning has thrown out this fresh paper, he finds Harrington's brother. So Harrington's brother is the only Harrington left, as his brother had his life taken very mysteriously after those 3 months. And it turns out that Henry Harrington, the brother, recognises very similar aspects to the present day throwing out and the present day Carswell threat. And so it ensues that maybe you might have only 3 months before your life ends, because there are very similar situations. And there the story ensues. I think there's quite a lot of meeting at the museum. So Edward Dunning works at the museum, and there was a moment where he was tapped on the shoulder, and he turns round, and there's a piece of paper lands on the floor, and it's passed to him by this stout gentleman. And it turns out that this piece of paper, the passing of, happened in the earlier Harrington situation, exactly in the same way. And this paper, in the first instance, was lost. And because the paper was lost, Harrington ended up losing his life. So it's decided between Dunning and Henry Harrington's brother that this piece of paper that you were passed in the museum, you must find. And the story, really, this piece of paper is the crux of the story, which they do find. And we have a little bit of a red herring here. I don't know if you two agree. The red herring of the long-winded explanation about this advert. So in the beginning of the story, Dunning takes a tram or a train into the museum, and he sees there's not many people on board, and he sees an advert at the end of the tram or the train, and in the glass window, and then of course his name is mentioned on it. Harrington's name is mentioned on it. Not Harrington's, Dunning's name is mentioned on it. So next day he goes back and mentions it to the train people, and they said, well, there isn't an advert. There was never an advert. So they all go back to follow it up, and no, it's not there. They find the same train, the same carriage. It was never there. So it's all getting a little bit mysterious. So I think that was a little bit of a red herring. Quite a long-winded way of coming to decide that the advert was just introducing a little bit of mystery to the story, really giving the reader a chance to think, oh, okay, I think we might be stepping into a little bit of a mystery here. But it was quite long-winded about that little part, I thought. So then Dunning and Harrington do decide that maybe things are getting very much worse. They're in the 3-month period now. And we jump a little bit further forward, where Harrington says to Dunning, my brother, just before his life was taken, he had a very deep feeling of doom for weeks and weeks. And then for the last week before he died, this feeling of doom. So it gets to that same point in Dunning's 3 months. And there's a phone call from Harrington, and he says, I think we should meet. Carswell has left his Dufford Hall, I think it's called, Lufford Abbey, and he's on his way to Dover, and I think we should meet him, and I think we should try and give him this piece of paper back that my brother never got the chance to do. So there ensues a train ride where all three of our members of the story are in one carriage, and they try and Dunning and Harrington trying to make out that they're not known to each other. So really the three people are not known to each other. Carswell, Harrington and Dunning are the only three people on the tram. And one gets up and goes out, the other one gets up and goes out, and they were all trying to wonder how we can give him this piece of paper back with any kind of belief. And then the opportunity arises. Carswell leaves and a load of papers fall on the floor as he leaves. So they decide that this piece of paper that they really need to get back to him, because Dunning's life might be in question if this paper is not given back. They find a way of doing it, and basically, I thought at the end of the story, Carsley, obviously, they arrive in Dover, and there's a boat waiting, and Carsley takes the boat. I thought it was a little bit of a letdown at the end because he had such a big build-up, like a big acceleration through the story, and it all made sense, and all the little clues were all put there. But at the end, it just seemed that it was just a bit of a letdown. I think that M.R. James would kind of maybe had hit all the marks he could hit for suspense, and that suspense couldn't go any higher for the end of the story because Dunning doesn't lose his life. Carswell, I think I remember, is left having not committed the murder, which he was obviously planning to do because this piece of paper had arrived. So I don't know how you two feel about that, but yes, that's the story. That's the synopsis.
Yep.
Maybe we'll talk about the end of the story.
We shall
see what you think.
So many parts of it. But that's definitely the one that I read this week. How about you, Ash?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and Sean, that synopsis has sort of like given me some cause to address some of the thoughts that I've had in it already. But yeah, first of all, I'm going to sort of like say I really, really enjoyed the story. I thought it was a brilliant choice, and
so did I.
It was just so efficient. I liked the way that the story was told. I thought there was humour in there. I thought that even though this was written more than 100 years ago, we're still looking at something that was so accessible. And you've got, I thought the horror in it was really good. The part where he's describing him putting his hand under the bed or inside the part of the bed and something with a mouth, I shat myself.
Yeah.
And I'm not reaching under the bed ever again.
A human mouth with hair.
Yeah, it was just, that was incredibly creepy. And to say that that was written so long ago, it can still send a shiver up your spine. That's what writing should be.
So Colin, we were talking last time I was on, and we were saying that I consider it to be good writing when you leave little signposts behind. And this story was filled with signposts.
Absolutely. Yeah, there were signposts all over the place. And and it was done in such a neat... I mean, I don't think a writer could get away with it today, because I think most publishers would sort of like say, no, it's too antiquated a style. But the fact that he directly addresses the reader, the fact that you've not got a specific hero within this story. You've got heroism within the story, but you've not got... It's not a story about one particular character, is it? I think probably the first quarter of it are all the setup for how Carswell is a bit of a git. I know that's not how M.R. James phrases it, but yeah, Carswell is a bit of a git, and he's got sort of like all these problems and issues. So yeah, absolutely loved it. Brilliant, brilliant choice. Colin, your thoughts?
It's one of my favourite stories of all time. I adore this story, and there are so many parts of it that I like and love about it. And there's so much I like about Mr. James in the way that he writes. And in this particular story, I think it comes across greatly. Yes, it is spooky. Yes, it is horrific at times. I think the whole scene with the slideshow is absolutely incredible. We set all the kids up, but it's the way he describes it as the moving images, which is something that M.R. James has done in other stories like the Mezzotint, for example. But this whole idea of, we don't know how he's done it. It's kind of magical idea that you're watching these slides and they're moving, and the Red Riding Hood one there is horrific, so that the kids go running out of the room. Beautiful. And I agree with everything you're saying in that the way it sets the story up and the way it sets these signposts going, and does lead you down a couple of blind alleys.
It does.
In one respect,
which is good in a way.
Yeah, which is what you need them. You can't just have the straight linear start to end. No. You've got to have that kind of thing. But the blind alley in this one does foreground the concept of 3 months. It does foreground a number of the other kind of quirky concepts that are going on with the rune side of things in this rather strange advert, and it didn't feel out of place. Like you say, it's a red herring, but it's also useful in what it's setting up. It's another one of those signposts that allows you to really sort of like dive into what's going on. I loved it. But I'm going to agree with you, and this is something that M.R. James is a bit guilty of, is the end felt like a footnote.
Yes. Yes, I was really surprised. Because I thought...
What was his name? Carson?
Coswell,
right? Because he does die. He actually... Well, we think he dies. They get word that somebody got hit by a stone.
That's right, yeah.
And
I was thinking, great, we're all set. We're on the train.
Yeah.
All three characters are all in the same cabin, let's say, whatever it is. So let's see what ensues. I couldn't wait. And I was a little bit let down.
Yeah, and it's actually something that is addressed by people that have used it as inspiration. Because, I mean, one of my favourite horror movies, I'm a bit of an old horror movie fan, particularly the old black and white. So I was brought up on horror double bills on BBC Two. And it's seriously informed me. But Night of the Demon, 1957, amazing thing, directed by Jackie Torra, I think. And it's completely inspired by the casting of the runes. But they change a little bit in that you can't hand the runes back. So in his story, he's kind of, so their win is they've handed the runes back, and it worked. Right, but what he's done is you can't hand the runes back, so you've still got to basically you've got to try and protect the piece of paper, but the piece of paper is a call to a demon. That's the whole point. Yeah. So it comes for that piece of paper and whoever's holding it.
Yeah. So really, essentially, I guess that piece of paper acts as the runes.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't quite get that when I listened to it, but yes.
The only point you really get it is when he does, because there's a wonderful piece of intertextuality going on where he talks about the Mariner. Oh God, see my brain's. What's the name of that Mariner book?
Coleridge, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner.
That's it, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and he mentions that as well, and that's got the whole idea of being too terrified to look back for the demon that is chasing you, and that's kind of part of it, and so he does foreground it in that little bit there, which other creators have taken on. I mean, most recently, I think Sam Raimi did one called Drag Me to Hell, which is also the same idea of the curse and taking it forward. But
also we've got things like The Grudge as well, which is like the 7 days thing.
Yes, and The Ring. The Ring does the same thing as well. Isn't it? That's heavily based on this concept that he came up with.
Yeah, and then M.R. James chooses 3 months as the period to elapse. But then, really, did it really need to be 3 months? Because of course, they meet and they chat and they realise that there are so many similarities in the two stories, and then they don't speak for weeks.
Well, I think it's what you said at the beginning, actually, Sean. You got to put yourself in 1911. So in 1911, because actually communication was so elongated, 3 months would be maybe 3 or 4 meetings between people. Yeah. So nowadays it would be maybe about 12 o'clock.
Yeah, true.
I want to throw a little bit of a curveball here, and this is, Sean, this is because of what you'd said in your synopsis, but Carswell's the victim here.
Carswell's the victim.
Yeah. Carswell's the victim because the way you describe in the synopsis, and you're absolutely right to say that the papers that he put through were utter rubbish, or that's how they were perceived by Harrington. But they weren't utter rubbish. This guy actually knows his stuff. He knows how to cast runes. He knows how to do alchemy. The guy clearly knows it. So,
Ash, I know this. I'm doing a university degree at the moment. If you don't know how to write an essay, you don't get very good scores. It's as simple as that. You can know all your stuff, but if you don't know how to do academic writing, you just get tossed out rather than tossed off.
But I think they're just being up their arse like typical university people with, oh, no, it's not right. Yeah, you've not done Harvard referencing, so okay, you don't know what you're talking about with it. And yeah, if you look at it from that perspective, he's actually written something that he's a subject-specific expert on. It's been pushed back by people who don't know as much about the subject as he does. And he ends up dead at the end of this story because these bastards have decided they don't want to publish his stuff. He's a fucking victim.
To be fair, that's not why he ends up dead, is it? He ends up dead because he's doing attempted murder via demon.
Potato, tomato.
Yeah, and of course, I love that little bit when he did actually take to the boat at the end of the story, and they said, "Did you just see a dog? Did you just see?" Obviously, he's being pursued by the devil.
Yeah,
there and then.
Yeah, that was a lovely subtle touch as well. It wasn't something like, oh, there was a big monster chasing after him. It was just,
yeah. And I guess in the writing of it, he must have thought, how am I going to get by this? But yeah, he chose a good route.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the fact that we've got shifting perspectives on that, that was one of the things that I did like about it. It just, it seemed quite cinematic in the way that it was laid out.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I saw it as a bit of a Tales of the Unexpected, or where they have like little twisty turns in the story.
Yeah, but it was even the way it was written, wasn't it? Because it's so much of the story is in dialogue, and then it's told in flashback, and it's almost the form of a script. In that way. I mean, when I was listening to it, because I read them and listen to them because I have dyslexia, and I find it much easier to sort of like bring those two together when you do it that way. And it just flows almost like there are these little moments, almost like 3 episodes of something. Oh yeah, and it has these little points that do that.
I could definitely see it televised. That's what I was seeing. I mean, in my mind's eye, I was definitely seeing it televisually. Maybe that's the actor in me.
But without any real description. That's the thing that stunned me. There's not really much in the way of describing scenes. When he goes to the theatre, he doesn't describe the theatre. It relies so much on that schemata, where it's like the reader's knowledge of something to fill in the gaps. And everything is just told in like this exposition of the plot, rather than being overly detailed in the scenery.
Yeah, but then, of course, when he's on his way to the museum and he's on the train, it's very well described. Very well described. Every single moment is described. So when he needs to describe it, he does it very, very well.
Yeah, it's a quality piece of writing.
Yeah. But yeah, I definitely saw the televisual side of it. It was good. It was quite touching, like frightening. When obviously it was Carswell, but obviously it's a dark night and there aren't many people on the train, and he's giving leaflets out and he just touches his shoulder. It's like, ooh, wow. I could really feel that myself. Which for a story of 1911 takes some doing.
Yeah.
There's a Stephen King short story called, actually it's in his collection, Everything's Eventual. And I think this one is actually Everything's Eventual, the story. And you've got a young lad in there who's employed to send out letters like this to people. He's got this gift where he can sort of like, send out, he can visualize an unpleasant fate happening to somebody, sends them an email that's got sort of like these runic characters within it, and it makes that fate happen to them. And you can sort of like see King's obviously been influenced by this. And M.R. James's story makes more sense, because if somebody was trying to send out an email, those runic characters would need to have been downloaded through the ASCII codes, and they wouldn't have been. Whereas, written runes like this just work so efficiently. What do we think was going on with the one that burnt? Do we think there was meant to be some diabolical influence?
Yes.
Oh, yes. The one that burnt in the inn they were in, or something, wasn't it? Was it Carswell himself who opened the door and there was a?
Well, it wasn't. No, it was. He didn't hear the word. His brother was saying, he didn't notice that the door had blown open, but there was this gust of warm wind.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
and it blew it into the fire, so therefore he had no chance of giving it back. And it's kind of in the film Night of the Demon. It kind of goes on about that a bit more, because the idea, you know, if you keep hold of it, that's the bit where you can't give the runes away. He'll always end up being destroyed. So the last person to have the runes is the one that, you know, gets taken. But so you can have much hilarity, can't you? When it blows away, and have no kind of final destination moments of falling over everything, just trying to catch it again. There's a whole sequence of ending up down the street and knocking old women over. And
but I mean, this was a great story, though. You know, out of the two I've been involved in, this was a great story.
Yeah, I was very superior. I love this one, and I love the fact that it didn't take itself too seriously. He was even at one point referring to being black spotted with the runes, and I'm just there thinking, you just sort of like throwing away offhand references to Treasure Island, and just so nicely done. So it's obviously aimed at an intelligent reading audience.
It's why I used the name Dr. Watson tonight, because I love the idea, because his doctor is called Dr. Watson. It's only mentioned the once. And I just love the idea that it is the Dr. Watson, that it's John Watson. And it would be just, you know, and it probably, I wouldn't put it past M.R. James to have done it for that reason.
No. I did, that thought did cross my mind. You've just reminded me. And I was thinking, why did he choose Watson? Obviously, there must be some kind of connection. And so, yes, I remember thinking that. That's when the servants had been sent to the hospital, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because they'd had some seafood.
From a purveyor that nobody else on the street had the...
Yeah, a purveyor that's never been seen there before also.
And again, it's kind of telling, isn't it? We've sort of like got these servants who are all down with ptomaine poisoning, and we don't give a shit what's happened to them, do we? It's sort of like part of the narrative that they're in hospital.
But once you're in the service of a gentleman, right? Once you're in the service of a gentleman, make sure you're seen all right.
But there was that wonderful
that dialogue was awesome.
Side to it,
the dialogue when it was to do with the advert, wasn't it? And the advert wasn't on the plate, and it wasn't in the glass, and they were being called all the names under the sun. I don't mind being called all the names. It's what the other people start thinking about it.
And if they start thinking I'm like that, Lord knows where I'll be in 12 months' time.
Fabulous.
Very good. Very good. I was very pleased to have I had to throw the synopsis together at the last minute, but I did make lots of notes.
You did. And actually you were more accurate with the names than I ever am when I do my synopsis.
You don't sound more comprehensive than me, because I just saw beginning, end.
Except when you did H.P. Lovecraft.
Did I go overboard with H.P.
I think the synopsis lasted longer than the chat on that one.
Well, it's Lovecraft, isn't it? I was trying to find synonyms for whatever racist thing he was on about.
Oh, can I just say, I mean, sorry, I keep thinking, seriously, like I say, this is one of my favourite stories of all time, and it's because of things like the incidental dialogue going on. There's the bit when the wives are talking, and I can't remember it word for word, but she kind of goes off on a tangent and then comes back again. You know, when she's talking about the Carlton, and she's talking about how he does the slideshow, you know, the Magic Lantern show. And she just goes on, an arca. It's almost like the, an arca. And you can almost imagine it, the kind of like Les Dawson, you know, over the fence talking about it, because he just keeps going off. And it was just brilliant. It was just sort of like, you wouldn't, so often now in modern short stories, you wouldn't see dialogue go off on just something that is so irrelevant to the story, but it's so important to building the character.
Yeah, but I guess, you know, certainly in TV and maybe film, you know, when I was a youngster, I used to love the fact that the show would take you in off on a red herring somewhere. It used to just make me smile. You know? It's a bit of a program filler and a time filler, but nonetheless, you know, you had to be good enough to spot it.
Yes.
You know, and that's what, and then of course with old films and old TV, there used to be the well, I don't think it's used very much ever since, where it begins at the end, where the piece begins at the end.
Yes. Yeah, and the whole thing is kind of told in retrospect.
Yeah. And you had to really kind of work it out very quickly, because otherwise it was quite confusing. But you were asked as the viewer to be, you know, intellectual enough to work it out quickly.
Yes.
I mean, I think if they did that nowadays, they would actually have to lead you down that garden path, wouldn't they?
Well, funny enough, we were talking a little bit last week about Stay Close, that new thing on Netflix. Part of it's filmed in Manchester, part of it's filmed in Blackpool and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I think it's an object lesson in how not to write a script. It's dreadful at places, and it does exactly what you're saying there. It is, instead of, there's so many of them now that are not allowing the audience to even work anything out. It's almost like have 5 hours of what is going on and then something completely different at the end that doesn't seem to marry up to anything.
Yeah, exactly. That's, you know, they did take the viewer's intellect into consideration a lot. You know, I think that, you know, I guess that's why I'm an actor at the end of the day. You know, I was impressed with the way that things were written and then pieced together, and then to use you as the, you know, as the intellectual property. You were the intellectual property of the piece, the viewer.
It takes a hell of a lot of guts, though, as a writer, to trust people to make those connections.
Yeah, but we do, and we did.
Yeah, it's just, I suppose it's one of the things that I worry about. Part of me wants to sort of like take readers by the hand and say, oh, look at this part, oh, look at this part. Part of me wants to sort of like give them some sense of autonomy and trust that they will find it. And part of me worries that some of the stuff that I do isn't actually getting noticed. I mean, I've got one line in, what was it? It was Death by Fiction. And I've got a character in there, this couple, they're married, and she's an internet bride, and her name's Hortensia, right? And her partner is, it's all set up for this. Her partner's just sort of like saying to her, look, you know what I think about your whore, because he calls her whore as an abbreviation. And to me, it was just sort of like, do I need to spell this out to readers? And I didn't spell it out to readers, but I've never got anybody sort of like come to me and say, do you know what? I fucking love that whole line that you've got in there. And I don't know whether that's because I was thinking, yeah, that's a lot better than it really fucking is, Lister, or whether it's because, people have missed it.
Well, I think if I would have read it, I think I would have had to have mentioned that to you, because it's clever, you know? It's asking you as the reader to work it out.
Yeah.
You know,
well, you know my stuff, Ash. You know my stuff, and you know I spend most of my time not explaining those kind of, because I do them for my own amusement more than anything else. You know, I like dropping in tiny little clever lines and then not really going back over them again to over-explain them. And then if somebody asks me a question, I'll explain it, and then they'll go, "Oh God, that was clever. Thanks for noticing." You know.
Yeah. I mean, you know, when I was in Coronation Street, I mean, the one thing that it wasn't a complaint because we understood the situation, but we would have to repeat certain parts of the story, maybe in between part one and part two, even just to remind the viewer where we're up to and what we're doing. But certainly from episode to episode, and it used to drive us up the wall. It's like, God, we're going through this again and again. It's like, well, yeah, but you know, we're a soap opera, and not everybody watches every episode. And, but I guess I was given the chance to do some storylines where I could actually take the viewer on a 12-month trip. You know, that my character didn't know it was going to be a 12-month trip, but me, the actor, knew it was going to be a 12-month trip. And I could take people uphill and down dale and instead of it just being the repetitive. And that's what I enjoyed when I was down there, because the writing and the writers, we all decided that this was a good way for this character to go, to actually just take the viewers on a trip, rather than it just being, repetitive. Yeah, I don't think they do that very much nowadays.
No, exactly what you're saying about the whole notion that you've got people that you used to have to reiterate plot points.
Yes.
People, it was something I picked up on when I was watching, thinking, I'm bloody sure they mentioned this about 10 minutes ago or in the last episode. But I also get why it needed to be done, because you've got people because rather than it being a book and you can sort of like flick back 3 pages and think, what the chuff did I miss because I just blanked out there? Chances are, if you're watching TV, chances are when I'm watching TV, my wife will sort of like say, fuck off into the kitchen and make me a brew. And I sort of like miss 10 minutes of whatever's going on there. So it's helpful to have the plot points pick up again like that.
Maybe what makes things popular, because I know you're a fan of Dan Brown stuff, Ash, and I'm not much of a fan. I think he writes cliffhangers brilliantly and makes you want to read the next chapter. But one of the things I really dislike about Dan Brown is the fact that he does constantly repeat information within a chapter. He's like, it's not just doubling down, he kind of trebles and quadruples and triples down on the information he's giving you. And he's a very popular writer.
Yeah. Digressing a little bit, still on Dan Brown, but when I watched, what's the bloody film called?
Which one? The Da Vinci Code?
The Vinci Code. When I watched the Da Vinci Code, it was exactly the same as I expected it to be from the book. Now, how many films have you been to see when you read the book? And it's like, what? Why did you do that? That's rubbish. The book's miles better. But with the Da Vinci Code, it was exactly what I expected.
The only time I've had something similar was when I was watching Game of Thrones, the TV show, and reading the book. And one chapter of Game of Thrones in the book was pretty much the same as you got on the TV series, certainly for the first season, or maybe the first couple of seasons. And they've done it beautifully. They've recreated it perfectly. I think you're right with the Dan Brown stuff. They do manage to get, they recreate it visually. I suppose this ties in with Colin's criticism of it. The fact that the difference between a book and a movie should be that we think the book is far superior, whereas a Dan Brown book and a Dan Brown movie, we think, which should I do? Should I sort of like spend 6 hours reading it or 2 hours watching it?
Well,
this is the problem with the Dan Brown book, because you're talking about books that are like this thick, and usually when you get films that are absolute, and we were talking about it with the Christmas Carol, for example, every adaptation of the Christmas Carol is absolutely spot on, because the Christmas Carol is a tiny little thin book and it hits these points. And some of the best films that you see based on literature are based on short stories, not novels, because novels have so much more detail that they fill the background with. So when you take a novel that thick and you watch a 2-hour movie and go, yeah, that was the novel, it shows you how much is a bit padding within that novel that you yourself whilst watching it can negate into doing that. It's not saying the story is not interesting. The fact it works as a film shows the story is exciting. It's hitting good plot points. It's pulling you along. And it's like I say, nobody writes a cliffhanger. When he gets to the end of a plot point, when he's doing that he's doing his pinch and he's moving on to the next plot point, my God, does he know how to pull an audience along at that point? It's all the stuff in between that is almost forgettable because you're only looking for those plot points.
Yeah, and I guess moving on from the book to the film, we seem to, I certainly seem to have stepped in that direction. We've got to mention The Lord of the Rings then. Yes. Oh my God. How many times had that been tried, to put that story into, they tried cartoon form, didn't they?
Yes, which is very good.
Rubbish. I thought it was rubbish.
Oh, I loved it.
Did you?
Yeah, I always wish they'd finished it. Yeah. I have a big problem with Lord of the Rings, right? One of which is being dyslexic has meant that it took me years and years and years and years to eventually be able to read the darn thing. And I finally got it read just before Fellowship of the Ring came out with from Peter Jackson.
Right. Okay.
And it's one of those. I prefer the film versions of them because I find them so much easier to understand.
Yeah. But didn't it tell the story the way the book told it?
Yes.
Yes, and somebody had to do, and how Peter Jackson did that, how he encapsulated obviously all the ups and the downs and the roundabouts, and and the personal horror that they had to go through. Fabulous how it was, how it was encapsulated.
I award him on dropping Tom Bombadil as everyone else has, because I think that's a dreadful part of the book. I know this man hates both versions of it. But I didn't like what he did with the ending as much. I thought the ending of it in the book was better in the way that the Shire had actually been completely fucked over, and Frodo couldn't cope with that, and that's why he went. I thought he pulled his punches at the end. So Ash,
I want to say that I think the film is way superior to the books. Then this is because the books are just such overwritten shite. I think Tolkien hated his children or his grandchildren or whoever these books were written for. And it was a case of, look, you little shit, if you don't go to bed and go to sleep now, I'm reading you another passage of this bollocks. And yeah, that'll fucking when you sort of like reading a part and it's, and here's another fucking hobbit and let's describe its toes and let's describe, piss off, Tolkien. So yeah, I thought the stories itself were far, far better when they were in film form, because that way you can sort of like fast forward to the good parts, if there were any. See, and now I think I sat through Lord of the Rings, and Tracy woke me up for the end of it, which that was very exciting. The Hobbit one, I turned that off after 10 minutes because it started fucking singing, and it was just a case of...
Oh no, he did ruin The Hobbit.
Yeah,
he did ruin The Hobbit. Yeah. He took something that was a nice, concise, self-contained story and turned it into something really over. He's like the opposite way around with The Hobbit.
Yeah, I tried it the other day. Tried to watch it. It was on the TV, but I wasn't getting on with it.
No, he completely fucks The Hobbit.
And yeah, it should be fun, really, because it's Tim from The Office. Yeah.
Anyway, we digress. So let's go. Let's bring us back to Mr. James for a second. I'm going to talk about these. So we've looked at the story itself, and we like the story. We think the story's brilliant. Maybe a kind of bit of an anticlimax at the end, but from all the M.R. James, I think that's something else that Stephen King nicked off M.R. James, was how to not end a story well. So we love that sort of thing. So, and again, if you go back to like 1911, if you look at a lot of things like the devil worship stories, this is really early on in devil worship stories as well, because most of you don't. Dennis Weekly doesn't come into about the 1930s, which are one of the big ones for all this sort of devil worship and that kind of thing. And then if you talk about Wicca, dancing around naked in the middle of a New Forest, that wasn't until about the 1950s when that all really came in. So, it is it'd be interesting. I need to do a bit of research to see what other kind of devil stories are around at the time. But I really think from a creative point of view, it's a beautiful piece of thought. That's gone
absolutely.
On.
Yeah. And I was unless I was involved in this podcast with you guys, which you very kindly invited me along to, I wouldn't have. Horror's not really a genre that I would generally search for in the bookshop. So it's been a real nice step into the an area that wouldn't normally attract.
Sure, did it scare you? Sure, did it scare you? You know the parts that we've mentioned, like the hand, putting the hand near the mouth thing, and did it unsettle you whilst you were reading it?
Yes, it did. It did unsettle me. Yeah. Just those little points, which were very well timed. Just when you maybe get to the point where you maybe forgotten about the last one, another one comes. And then there's a lot to be said about timing in a story as well.
Yes,
that's right. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I would guess. I'm not as learned as you guys with literature, of course, but nonetheless, there's lots to be said for timing. It's so easy to get wrong.
Very, and I think actually your perspective as an actor is very important in understanding that, because I've met a lot of writers that don't understand that. Point of view.
Oh, very much so. And I mean, I'm not working in that kind of environment on a weekly basis anymore. But I used to really enjoy it, because I would be given the opportunity to untie because we never got to meet the writers very often. But of course we would, but very infrequently. I guess they were just locked in their attics.
As you can see, this is what their attics are going to look like.
With an angle poised lamp and putting money in the bank. But they were very good, very, very good.
I think you worked on the street at the time. I can't remember his name now, but the guy that went on to write Shameless.
Yes.
You worked Paul with Abbott. Him, didn't you?
Yeah, Paul Abbott. Yes, I did. Yeah, very much so. Paul and I, we got on well, and he was very much in favour of my character becoming more and more popular. And him and Tom, they would write, for me, and then Peter Wally, the exalted Peter Wally would write the best stuff for my character. But it's the untying, and like every actor, you have an opportunity to face the script, and now you either learn it very quickly and you don't get I've got it, and then you go and do it, and then of course you didn't really get it, or you give yourself that time to study it, and only after a certain amount of study do you think, this harks back to here, and if I do it this way, I know that scene's coming up next week, and that will help me. And so, very clever writing, But also, you have to be clever as the actor to try and to unpiece it, because not everybody did.
And you don't always get the opportunity to sit with the writer.
Well, no, not at all. We barely speak. But nonetheless, I guess that's why I'm so keen on reading at the moment. It's because it's the same, because I'm not having it on a weekly basis with work. Then of course you just pick a book up and you can do the same. Really,
do the same in that way. Well, in which case, I'm going to ask you a question, because this actually gives us a really interesting perspective. If you were given the opportunity, take the idea of jobs out the way to start with, right? If you were given the opportunity from an artistic point of view to play one of the characters in the casting of the rooms, first of all, would you like the opportunity to play in the casting of the rooms? And secondly, which character would you pick? Which character would you like to play?
Which character would I like to play? Well, I think I would probably be cast. See, there I'm already thinking professionally. I would probably be cast as maybe Harrington's brother. But definitely Dunning would be interesting, wouldn't he?
Yes, I think Dunning would be very interesting.
And I guess that my qualities as an actor will probably suit that kind of character better, because I could hopefully be able to take the viewer on a psychological little journey.
Well, get a show reel off to Mark Gettis, because he's going to do this at some point at Christmas. He's doing all M.R. James's stuff.
Right. Yeah,
but
then, of course, it gets interesting then, because is the director going to give you those moments where you're allowed to take the viewer down a certain path? It might only be a look, and it might only be like an unsure feeling just in the middle of being sure about everything. Then all of a sudden you have an unsure moment. If it's not covered, then it's not covered, is it?
Yeah.
So then you get artistic qualities.
I've got to say, Mark Gettis has done 2 M.R. James now for the Ghost Story for Christmas, and both of them, I think he absolutely nails it.
Good.
In the writing of it, because I think he gets it. He gets why the story is scary. And he also gets why because he's the mezzotint. The end was much better than the mezzotint itself. So I think he gets where it has weaknesses as well, and where he can use his own skills to prop that up in a modern world.
Good. Isn't that refreshing to hear that?
Sorry?
Isn't that refreshing to hear that?
I think
not just picking something up to make some money out of it and making a mess of it.
Yes. No. This is someone who genuinely loves and has a passion for what he's doing.
Lovely. Yes.
Colin.
Yes.
What we're reading?
What we're reading next week?
Yeah.
I need to look up the writer for it. I was going through thinking, what am I supposed to do? What are we going to read next week? And then I read one of the comments on one of the YouTubes where somebody was actually having a little bit of a dig at me for not reading the Yellow Wallpaper.
Charlotte Perkins Gilmore.
There you go. So that's what I think we need to read so that I can redress this balance. I haven't read the Yellow Wallpaper, and therefore I need to read it.
You haven't read the Yellow Wallpaper?
No.
Oh, brilliant. Sean, have you read that one?
No.
Oh, what a great story. Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, it's all about... you
want to read along with us, Sean? Come back next week?
Yeah, love to.
Do you know, I mentioned this one in my PhD Viva. We were sort of like talking about different ways that this could be interpreted. And I sort of like said, well, central character in the Yellow Wallpaper. I said, is it somebody who's sort of like the epitome of feminine angst, who's sort of like been torn by the mores of her husband, or is she just a little bit mental?
Yeah.
And still they gave me a PhD.
Already.
Still they gave you a PhD.
Yeah.
Just hand them out nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Right, so you're coming in for that one, Sean?
Well, yes. I will get in touch with you if anything changes, because I'll probably need to speak to Carol about availability, but I think I'm fine.
Yeah, well,
if anything changes, I'll let you know.
We'll leave it as an open invitation. Like I say, you're coming along, but if anything happens, we understand,
Completely. And Sean, it's been brilliant seeing you again. Thank you for picking such an awesome story.
Yes. Awesome story. Some really good insights into it. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, lovely. I've really enjoyed my time with you two guys.
Likewise. Thank you.
Brilliant. Right. See you later, everyone.
Okay. Bonne chance.
Bye.